The Alexian Brothers ministry began in the Middle Ages. Small groups of men and women banded together to carry out Christ's commands. They would tend the sick, feed the hungry, bury the dead. From a handful of anonymous laymen along the Rhine and in the Low Countries of Holland and Belgium, the Alexian Brothers grew. In 1347, the Black Death, a horrible plague, struck Europe. Thousands died painfully as their families abandoned them, but the brothers refused to flee, risking their lives and sometimes losing them. They stayed to nurse the victims, to care for their sores, and to bury them. The numbers of brothers began to grow. In 1472, they at last became a true religious congregation. They were called cellites, both for the graves they dug and also for the small monastic rooms in which they lived. The brothers adopted the rule of St. Augustine, and for the patron of their first chapel, they chose the early Roman saint, Alexius. The brothers identified with this young man who fled a life of luxury to serve the poor. They soon became known to those who worshipped in their chapel as the Brothers of St. Alexius. In 1865, Brother Bonaventure Thalen came from Germany to begin the work of the Alexian Brothers in this country. He began the healing mission in Chicago at a small frame house on the city's north side. This became the first Alexian hospital. Its first patient was a man he found lying in a ditch. From Chicago, the order spread throughout the United States.
The storm raged so strongly and the sea was so violent that it caused the death of 49 sheep and a number of chickens that had been loaded onto our ship for food. In 15 days, we progressed only as far as we normally would have in 3 days. Marie-Madeleine Achard.
The first sisters to arrive on the shores of the United States came in 1727. Driven by a burning desire to serve God and a healthy dose of curiosity about the New World, they boarded a ship in Lorient, France, bound for the French territory of La Nouvelle-Orléans. Marie-Madeleine, a young novice, and 11 of her French Ursuline sisters made the last stretch of their treacherous ocean journey up the steamy, mosquito-filled bayous. She wrote to her father,
It is true that the ardent desire that we had to arrive at the Promised Land made us endure our trials with joy.
Within a very short time of the Ursulines coming to New Orleans, they had established both hospitals, orphanages, and also schools.
Since their arrival in the days before there was even a United States, approximately 220,000 women living in hundreds of religious communities have quietly contributed to the building of America.
They were pioneers, but they were also entrepreneurs because they learned on-the-job training. They had education, but they didn't have an education perhaps in construction. They didn't have an education in finance. They didn't have an education in development or fundraising. They did what they needed to do, and they did it with great gusto and courage and faith.
Well, I think one of the analytical mistakes we often make about religious sisters is that we think their role as kind of pioneers in Catholic life began with the mid-1960s. But the truth is, historically, in many ways, that's always been the role that sisters have played in the church.
I think Catholic sisters are always pioneers, but we don't set out to be pioneers. What we set out to do is to respond to the needs around us.
This is Kathleen. We're going to go in and see.
Generally, people don't believe that I'm a sister upon first introduction, and I'm always open to answering questions, and I appreciate when people are courageous enough to ask a variety of questions, including how our lifestyle really works. I first realized that being a sister was a possible way of life for me when I began to know sisters as real human beings. When I saw that they cried and laughed, it made it seem much more real and much more possible. Throughout time, there's been poverty and suffering and illness and great needs. And Again and again, the sisters have met those needs with grace, with courage, with perseverance. And so I draw a lot of strength from that.
One of the things that intrigues me as a historian is, why did women enter religious life? But if you think about it, if you were a Catholic woman in the mid-19th century, where else could you find an opportunity for education, for meaningful work, for adventure, than under the auspices of the church through women's religious life? These were opportunities that were not available to women in secular society.
In eras in which Catholics were either sort of excluded from the circles of power by a hostile Protestant majority in the United States, or they were a blue-collar, impoverished, ethnic immigrant church, women's religious life was seen as a route to sort of liberation, social emancipation, to be able to make a meaningful contribution.
When I entered the Sisters of Notre Dame, at that time, we were not allowed to go home. When my father died, I could not go home. That was a part of giving all. You gave up everything. I actually believed it was a higher way of life. I don't believe that anymore. But that was a strong motivation, that this was grander and more noble, and you gave up more, you surrendered more. Our founders used to say, just give me 12 women. If I have 12 women, we can make a difference. I think the sense of God and the sense of solidarity with other women and a very strong sense of community was like the wellspring of energy.
Some have made the choice to enter religious life with ease. For others, the decision came with considerable internal struggle. One of those was Elizabeth Ann Seton, born 2 years before the American Revolution. Married and the mother of 5, she was widowed at the age of 29. Elizabeth Seton's decision to convert to Catholicism astonished her Protestant family, many of whom associated the faith with lower-class Irish immigrants.
My poor soul is still more unsettled and perplexed from day to day. Like a bird struggling in a net, it cannot escape its fears and tremblings.
In 1809, Seton founded the first indigenous community of religious women in America, the Sisters of Charity. She later would lay the foundation of the Catholic parochial school system in the United States. 200 years after her birth, the Catholic Church declared Elizabeth Ann Seton a saint. In 1830, fewer than 500 sisters lived in the United States. By 1900, their numbers had increased 100-fold to nearly 50,000. Sisters were part of the Great Migration, along with millions of other European immigrants.
Sisters came for a variety of reasons. It's really surprising. Some, you hear stories of bishops going to European capitals and asking for help. Some came because of the people from their country came, and so they came to minister to them. Some came out of economic necessity, that things were really bad in the home country.
While the country struggled to live up to its founding ideals, revolution, famines, and wars in other countries continued to drive people to America's shores. In the aftermath of the Haitian Revolution, a petite woman landed in Baltimore Harbor in the early 1800s. Elizabeth Clarice Lang was born free in the West Indies of a Haitian mother. Described as French to her soul, Mother Lang founded the Oblate Sisters of Providence, the first order of black Catholic sisters in America.
The communities that had been founded up to that time had never accepted black women. They had no formal laws against it or policies, but it just wouldn't have been accepted in that society.
During a time when slavery was legal in America, a descendant of slaves founded a second community of African American sisters. Henriette DeLille, born in New Orleans in 1813, established the Sisters of the Holy Family in 1836. Delisle and other members of her community struggled with poverty and racism from the local Catholic community and from society at large. The community would provide nursing care to former slaves as well as an orphanage and schools for children. Overcoming the barriers of being both black and female, Mother Lang and Mother Delisle began works that continue to this day. Delisle died a few weeks before President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. By then, the brutal and divisive Civil War deeply embroiled the United States. On a winter day in 1861, a gunboat ran upriver under a flag of truce. It carried the remains of Mary Lucy Dosh, a Sister of Charity of Nazareth, the first Catholic sister to die on duty during the Civil War. Her death briefly silenced the guns on both sides.
You have this phenomenon of sisters in full habit witnessing to all those around them that they're there for the human being, wearing a Confederate uniform or a Union uniform. And I think that built a lot of credibility in the local government, in state, and at a national level, that these are women who are willing to put aside whatever differences society may place and just respond to the need in front of them.
More than 600 sisters representing 21 different communities served as nurses during the war. As the Civil War began, the Union Army operated only one hospital. The Confederacy had none. Catholic sisters, however, already directed 28.
Many wounded men whose limbs had been amputated were there with little or no care. We pinned up our habits, got brooms and buckets of water, and washed the blood-stained walls. We were not prepared as nurses, but our hearts made our hands willing. Mother Augusta Anderson.
Teaching sisters learned to nurse. Nursing sisters quickly adapted to the horrors of the battlefield. They cared for wounded soldiers in hospitals, on transport ships, and in barracks. They even carried men through the mud to makeshift tents. Sister Anthony O'Connell pressured Army doctors to allow sisters to tend to soldiers on the front lines. Her lobbying succeeded, earning her the title Angel of the Battlefield. A soldier's diary recounts, "Happy was the soldier who, wounded and bleeding, had her near him to whisper words of consolation and courage."
I am not at all brave. A greater coward seldom traveled toward the setting sun. Sister Martha Mead.
If you look at the history of religious life in the Catholic Church over the years, one thing that tends to unite them all is that this is a never-say-die bunch of women. I mean, you know, you're talking about orders that a century ago would send out 2 members, put them on a Conestoga wagon, and send them out to the Midwest of the United States with no bank account, no support. And within a generation, they had built schools, and they had built hospitals, and they were serving parishes.
Sisters brought a feminine sensibility to the frontier, often while doing tasks traditionally done by men. In 1856, equipped with construction tools and a gift for design, building, and fundraising, Mother Joseph Pariseau arrived by steamer ship to the Washington Territory. Her father boasted she could drive a nail as well as any man, and she would prove it. During the next 50 years, she designed and built hospitals, schools, and orphanages throughout the Northwest.
The bishop has furnished the lumber. As for the rest, Providence will provide.
In Western towns where unmarried women seldom went out alone, sisters demonstrated plucky spirit, a healthy sense of humor, and a can-do attitude that commanded respect. They set out by horseback on begging tours, sometimes led by American Indians. Through these innovative methods of fundraising, they financed their schools and hospitals. From loggers in northern Minnesota to cowboys in North Dakota, several communities sold insurance tickets to the working men, often with a disclaimer for injuries caused by unruly behavior. In the brutal cold of the Wisconsin logging camps, the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother sold tickets to the loggers to raise money to build St. Joseph's Hospital.
Loggers who were always getting hurt, chopping off a limb or having some other accident out in the camps, figuring out a way for them to pay by buying these tickets for $2, $3, $4, $5, $8, whatever they wanted to insure themselves for, so that they then would be covered if they got hurt during the year.
We are always being called to the edge. We are always being called to the more. So maybe the other word for that is we're being called to the frontiers of today. And we walk with our brothers and sisters to those frontiers and into those frontiers.